Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, the most visible aspect of diplomacy is those photo op handshake meetings that often happen between heads of state, ministers and officials. But beneath this top level of diplomacy is a network of unofficial activities and dialogue between think tanks, civil society organizations, academics and private citizens. All of that helps support and strengthen official ties. Now, on the 17th of August, the Institute of Strategic and International Studies will be hosting one of this region's main Track 2 strategic conferences, the Asia-Pacific Roundtable. We have the good folks from the think tank joining us on the show tonight to tell us a little bit more about what we can expect from this conference. Let's speak first to Herizal Hazri, the CEO of ISIS Malaysia. Herizal, thank you for joining us on the show today. Now, I understand that the Asia-Pacific Roundtable took a bit of break last year because of the pandemic, but now it's back this year. It's got this theme, the theme of disruption redux, and I'm just curious to know about that theme and what core issues the roundtable seeks to address with that theme in particular.
Well, thank you, Melissa and Sharad. Always a pleasure to speak to you guys. The Asia-Pacific Roundtable has always, seek to address issues of disruption. For 35 years, what we've been doing is we've been trying to sort of like track, all these changes that might, change the composition of geopolitics in Southeast Asia, as well as some considerations, local considerations within countries in the region. So the team really is talking about that disruption that normally happens. It is nothing new for us, but what it is happening is really also this year, it is looking at that disruption from a bigger scale and a bigger angle. So in short, I would say that the theme is about acknowledging disruptions that happens all the time. And I think that's just natural in global politics. But on the second hand, it is also about looking at, how that disruption can be managed and how we can move forward, thinking about, what needs to be put in place, to address this.
Herizal, do you think that the COVID, disruption, the pandemic has been of an exceptional sort? That unlike recessions, wars, and regional tensions, that this pandemic has been particularly challenging for the region, and why so?
Most certainly. First of all, I can't really compare this pandemic to war because, I've been lucky enough not to experience wartime or living during wartime. But I can definitely tell you that this pandemic has, it has disrupted, different parts of what we know as life today. It has disrupted the economics of it. It has disrupted the security. It has also face the possibility of even realignment of global politics or geopolitics around the region. Lives are affected from the normal, working people to up to the level of administration. So I think it is very different, and we are, or at least we have to be prepared to look at the world in a very different way and start thinking about, how do we prepare ourselves for that.
I'm curious to know about the specific challenges for kind of track 2 diplomacy during a time of a pandemic, because again, we've seen a lot of diplomatic relations tested and perhaps even strained, if I may, but also taken a back seat to a lot more internal or inward-looking policy making when it comes to dealing with a pandemic. So I'm curious to know, with this Asia-Pacific Roundtable and its ethos of track 2 diplomacy, what do you expect in terms of outcome, and why is it so important that we have something like this now and not just rely on, say, state visits and official meetings?
Very, very important question, Melissa. I think, first of all, as the word diplomacy suggests, a lot of the diplomacy or the act of it in itself is actually being done one-to-one. That is when it is most effective, in my opinion, as well as track two. We are not involved with sort of like track one diplomacy, but even at track two, there's a lot of diplomacy engagements or disciplines or practice that is being done. So one of the biggest problem with the pandemic is that we've lost that 70% human to human sort of like contact, where I always believe that that's where things are being done in a faster and better way. We just had to deal with it. We had to move on to really, adapting to this new normal, working and engaging digitally. So to me, that was basically, or that is still definitely one of the biggest challenges. As you rightly mentioned, we had to skip one APR. We thought that, we could skip one and then we could come back to 2021 and we could actually, do a full blown sort of like, meeting. Well, that's kind of wishful thinking. And then we realized that, we have to really deal with this right now and we have to move on with the new normal, so to say, because we don't know what's going to happen next year. That's number one. Number two is even governments right now, they're extremely uncertain about, what policies should be in place, how to move forward. What is this new normal? People keep on saying, new normal. Actually, in reality, is not we really know, how that would look like. So for us, it's really challenging because we are really playing with possibilities and we are trying to advise and we are trying to send some suggestions to the government, and we need to do it well because we know that, if we miss sort of like aim, right, on this kind of things, the implications and impact will be huge.
Harrison, could you tell us about your guest list? Because I imagine that the reason these track two conferences work well is that they get the heavy hitters, they get the people in positions of decision making, and therefore allow for some really transformative conversations to happen. Could you tell us who's going to be there and why you've chosen to have these people in particular?
Yeah, so traditionally, the Asia-Pacific Roundtable, I think it's worth noting here that it started off as a roundtable, like, just a group of people in one room at the ISIS building, our conference hall. The table is still there. 35 years ago, we did it like that. And, we've expanded, and you're absolutely right, Sharat. The reason why we expanded and the impact is really when we are able to bring more people, especially in positions of influence, I would say, and positions, to move directions and to craft policies, for their countries, as well as how they communicate in the region. Now, this year, after 35 years, we are very happy to still have that kind of support and participation. We're going to have the Prime Minister opening the APR. We're going to have the Director General of WHO, Dr. Tedros, to also give an opening remark. We'll have, senior participation from the region. All the members of ASEAN ISIS have confirmed that they are attending. We have academics. We have, practitioners. We have civil servants, as well as students and researchers. So we're quite happy. Our numbers are showing around 500 as of today that has been confirmed. As you know, that the APR has always been by invitation only. This year, we've loosened that a little bit, embracing the new sort of like life of having this online. We've invited a little bit more people, and the response has been really, really good.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I'm wondering, ASEAN just celebrated its 54th anniversary recently, and I'm just wondering, in terms, ASEAN has faced certain challenges, currently facing some very key challenges in the way the states are managing the pandemic, but also individual states are dealing separately. There seems to be need for more cohesion and more intergovernmental cooperation within ASEAN. Is that going to be discussed within this conference? And are you expecting there to be criticisms thrown in ASEAN's way, in ASEAN's way?
Right. That's definitely going to be the underlining, topic, if I may, at the APR. Even since the first APR, there's always been, interest and conversation about where ASEAN move to, how ASEAN should be, how ASEAN should address issues, and so on and so forth. Criticisms, definitely. That's what Track 2 are very good at, right? We not only basically analyze the situation and put in strong sort of opinions if we feel that it's not helpful, but we also criticize ourselves. The ASEAN IC states, we are consistently looking at how we can do better and how we can support ASEAN to be stronger. Now, worth noting is that this is all a process, and what's quite interesting this year is that, as you mentioned, ASEAN is facing this pandemic, and this is something that nobody had planned before. Although I have to tell you that the APR did discuss about about pandemics in the past, and what or how we should sort of organize ourselves, not a main team as a main team, but in some of the conversation. But again, when you face it, it's definitely something else. I am really looking forward to this kind of conversations this year. I think definitely, countries, especially among the ASEAN members, are going to come up and really step up and say that, there are a few things that we really need to do fast, because we have no choice now compared to before. But not just that, we also have ASEAN partners, country partners, at the APR. We have, Australia participating, as you know, we have China as, a separate sort of ambassadorial session. So all of these other countries are also looking at how, especially can help push this ASEAN or strengthening ASEAN agenda forward.
Okay, very quickly then, what about the question of Myanmar, and who's going to be representing Myanmar in these conversations, considering the very disruptive nature of the coup against the civilian government, and really the mayhem that's happened in that country in the last 6 months?
So Myanmar is going to be a very important session at the APR. We will be discussing about Myanmar. But to answer your question, who will be representing Myanmar? Unfortunately, we do not have a representation from the ASEAN ISIS member in Myanmar. They are going through some reorganization, and we do not think they are prepared, or they have leadership right now to attend the APR yet. But apart from that, we're looking forward to really discuss about this and look at different ways and avenues on how Track 2 can also play an important role to support the end of violence or non-democratic measures in Myanmar. We are also looking to try and push forward NGOs, as well as other regional initiatives for this vision for Myanmar. So I think it's going to be a hot topic, and it's hopefully we'll come up with something brilliant, to say the least, to try and address this issue.
Harizal, thank you so much for being on the show. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Harizal Hazri of ISIS Malaysia there joining us on the show. We're going to take a quick break, but more on Consider This, so don't go anywhere. Hi, thanks so much for staying with Sharad and I on Consider This. But if you've just joined us, tonight we're discussing what we can expect from the upcoming Asia-Pacific Roundtable conference, which will be hosted by the Institute of Strategic and International Studies Malaysia on behalf of the ASEAN ISIS Network. Thomas Daniel is a fellow in the Foreign Policy and Security Studies program at ISIS Malaysia. He joins us on the line now. Thomas, good evening. Thank you for being on the show today. What do you think, in terms of from an ISIS perspective, what do you think will be some of the more important conversations and issues that the Asia-Pacific Roundtable will seek to discuss this year, having been put on hold for a year?
Good evening, Melissa and Sharad. Thanks for having me. Well, I think fundamentally the Asia-Pacific Roundtable this year is going to evolve around the idea of disruption, and basically our sessions are going to be structured around that. I think two particular topics that I would like to highlight in particular is the impact of this pandemic on the strategic global realignment. This is something that has been happening even before the advent of COVID-19, and the impact of the pandemic has really sort of brought out these issues to the fore. The other issue, of course, is something that is very important to us in Southeast Asia, which will be the developments that's happening in Myanmar post coup in February, and how that is not just impacting the developments in the country, but also the region and ASEAN as a regional organization.
Thomas, could you walk us through some of that particular panel on a global realignment, the individuals that you have brought together, and why you chose them in particular to catalyze that conversation?
Thank you. Well, I think the challenge for us as conference organizers is really to sort of get the topics right, and then to find the right speakers who are able to do this. And as a conference organizer, it's, we need to keep the panel balanced to represent sort of a regional view or sort of multiple views from across the region. And I think that's what we've tried to do for all our panels. So for the panel on global realignment, we have sought to identify key scholars who are engaged in these conversations in Southeast Asia and beyond, and we've tried to bring them together at the APR, and I think we've sort of managed that.
I think I agree with you. I would also be curious to know what will be said about Myanmar and how ASEAN and regional partners will be looking at resolving a post-coup Myanmar. Can we look at that panel? Because we spoke to Harizal a little bit earlier, and he said that unfortunately there won't be a representative from Myanmar, but again, we've seen ASEAN's appointment of Brunei's second Minister of Foreign Affairs recently as special envoy to Myanmar. How are we thinking about curating this conversation about Myanmar, particularly given that there won't be stakeholders present at the table?
Right, just to mention something about our search for a speaker from Myanmar on that panel, we did try to reach out, but unfortunately, given the realities on the ground, we do have to keep in mind that some of the panelists that we reach out to will not be comfortable, because unfortunately they face very real threats to their lives or to the lives of their loved ones. I mean, this sort of just sets the scene of the kind of conversations that we're going to be having about Myanmar, where folks unfortunately have had to leave the country. And even when they are abroad, they still don't feel very safe having these conversations in an open setting like the Asia-Pacific Roundtable. When we go into the issues that we're going to discuss, I think some of what we're trying to nail down with this panel is whether ASEAN has the capacity to bring these different factions together. We want to look at the ongoing humanitarian costs of the violence and the impact of this to the large number of Burmese who are living abroad in Thailand and in and in Malaysia and in Bangladesh. We want to look at the likelihood of this domestic deterioration and its impact to ASEAN as a regional organization, and how ASEAN's action or inaction really is viewed among its own people. I think these are very, very important conversations to have. And unfortunately, as much as the conversation is going to focus on Myanmar, and it should, ASEAN has sort of inserted itself, whether it wants to or not, into the conversation. And what is happening in Myanmar is going to, unfortunately, it's going to make a statement about ASEAN, about what ASEAN has done and what it's trying to do. And I think local policymakers in Southeast Asia needs to, they really do need to keep this in mind.
Thomas, Myanmar is very interesting. It's already being called by some media as a super spreader state because the crisis there is not purely political. It's also impacting the management of the pandemic, and so the Myanmar as a country poses perhaps an existential threat to its neighbors. We're all here of infections spreading to Yunnan in China and so on and so forth. Very interesting that you have a panel on vaccine distribution diplomacy, which I think, I guess many people, many policymakers in the region think is key to a recovery. And ASEAN has been all about recovery, about economic growth and a 600 million people market and such. I mean, what exactly is going to be discussed in this panel?
So the panel on vaccine diplomacy, it doesn't just focus on sort of vaccine diplomacy, but it also focuses on vaccine distribution. Let me address the bit about diplomacy first. I think, when this pandemic, about a year after the pandemic, when conversations really started focusing on vaccines once they became available, the question, really was and still is about how available they are and the access that sort of countries like Malaysia and other developing countries will have to these vaccines. Now, Malaysia, like many other countries in Southeast Asia and the Global South, have both purchased vaccines, but also been the recipient of aid and of donations by these vaccines. This comes from China, this comes from the United States, this comes from the EU, this comes from Australia, and unfortunately, for us in the Global South, we need to have a conversation on what will be the long-term impact of vaccine diplomacy, especially seeing that this vaccine diplomacy takes place, in the shadow of major power competition, especially among the US and China in the Asia-Pacific region. I would like to say that we can separate the two, but I'm a bit of a realist and a bit of a glass half empty guy. So I will have to say that it's very hard to separate it, despite the sort of arguments and the sort of assurances given coming out of Washington and Beijing. The second aspect of this panel is really on distribution. And I think the question that we're trying to address here is that really, what are the challenges that different states face in distributing this vaccine, and have internal safeguards really hindered or helped the process? I remember having a conversation with someone once, and the phrase he used that, in a state like this, when we need vaccines, as much vaccines as we can quickly, is it a matter of doing something? Is it a matter of doing the right thing, or is it the matter of doing something correctly? These are some of the questions that we have in mind.
Right, I think that you hit the nail on the head when it comes to the issues and the conversations, the topics that need to be discussed. Really timely and I think quite critical to discuss these topics. But one of the things with conferences is, after it's done, everybody has a great time, puts out great ideas, but then they kind of go off and then the energy fizzles out. This being a track to a strategic diplomatic conference, and I'm just wondering, within the ASEAN ISIS network, what would be the outcome of, a positive outcome of the Asia-Pacific Roundtable? Will there be follow-ups? Will there be ideas and discussions that will be taken forward from this conference?
We really hope so. I think the Asia-Pacific, the APR, it has a pretty long track record of serving as the sort of informal incubator of ideas, because we allow. You have officials who might participate either in their official capacity or in their private capacity, and back when we used to convene physically, one of the highlights of the APR, at least for those who attended the conference, were all these little side conversations that used to happen, or even the conversations in the room where where you could, because of the track-to nature of the conversation, approach ideas creatively, perhaps a bit provocatively, in a way that officials can't normally do in their official capacity. And this allows for folks to have those side meetings to think outside the box. Now, some of that might be a bit of a challenge this year because we're doing it virtually, and but at the same time, it's important to have this space for ideas to be incubated. Our online platform, what we've selected, the reason why we're not going with the traditional Zoom or a Google Meets, and why we're going with a specific platform that allows for participants to enter a virtual chat room by themselves, to have that engagement, for participants to know who the others are and to reach out to them, is for us to try to create that space online for participants to continue this process of engagement. It's the first time we're doing this virtually, as I think Mr. Harizal might have mentioned, and we really hope that we're going to be able to take this forward from here.
All right, we wish you all the best of luck. That was Thomas Daniel from ISIS Malaysia. The think tank will be hosting the Asia-Pacific Roundtable on the 17th and 18th of August. And that is all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. Don't forget to get the latest news on COVID-19 vaccines. You can get that on astroawani.com as well as the Astro Awani app. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night.